Yes.
Are we living in a simulation?
That's a good one. I'm always going to laugh. So are we living in a simulation? So that nobody can answer, first of all. So I could just end it right here and say no. Or not say no. So the interesting thing about this, and a lot of people mistakenly think that there's a philosopher, Nick Bostrom, who's really bright fellow. I've read his book on AI, really great thinker, and he popularized this, what they call the simulation hypothesis. And I'll have to double check, but essentially he just kind of does it as a logic problem. I guess you'd say that might be the incorrect thing, but he's like, basically he lays it out this way. There's a few options that either future civilizations or highly advanced civilizations will have no interest in running simulations. So therefore the answer would be no, because nobody wants to do it. And I believe either the second one was something about the limits, either that there's no capacity or we don't get to the point where we can. Or the third point is essentially that, yes, civilizations will be interested in running ancestor simulations. Yeah, civilizations will be interested in running ancestor simulations, which is what we would be in. And essentially it says that point 3 is true, that the probability is that we're living in one. And basically, I watched him struggle trying to get Joe Rogan, because Joe Rogan was like, well, what if we're the ones who will do it? What if we're the only real one? He's saying, well, if you think that we can run these, and there's no reason to think that people wouldn't, once you have the capacity to run them, that you won't run multiple ones. And then you start getting into the question. So anyway, if you can run multiple ones, then people would probably run them with tons of parameters, right? So they could run them in parallel, and even our civilization could be a byproduct of a different alien civilization running their own ancestor simulation with huge universal, or like say they're running a simulation of the whole Milky Way galaxy. Say they live on the other side of it and we haven't detected them. But their simulation is so big that that we and all the things that we think of as our existence and the planet's existence and everything else is contained within their simulation, right?
Okay, what is a simulation?
So again, some people, and usually like stuck up physicists, are like, well, it's impossible to simulate the universe, because a simulation of the universe would be as big as the universe. But just like in video games, and this is what people use, so the simulation would essentially be any level of representation of existence that has enough parameters that it would provide some kind of use. It could be for entertainment, for all you know, right? It doesn't have to be for scientific research. Once again, this is easier and easier to see as you see video games, for instance, and virtual reality starting to gain such scope.
So a simulation inside of a simulation?
See, this is the thing, right? So a very simple little example is like I played a game, Grand Theft Auto 4, and you're playing the game, and then inside the game there's the internet, their internet, and their cell phone. So the player has a cell phone, and you have friends that you have to like text, and so all of a sudden you're like living this weird meta life where you get home and you're like, one of your activities is to play a video game inside a video game, right? Or you're on the internet inside a video game, or you're on a cell phone inside a video game. So, and one of the tricks in video games is for instance, if something's very far away, the computer won't render the entire three-dimensional models at the highest resolution. Oftentimes it'll actually be like a two-dimensional image or an incredibly simplified model. So this is something that, people say, well, you might be able to simulate everything because when I look away, nothing's being computed. Like I can hear you, but it's until I look. And then also someone could say that there's nothing, every single object, until I go up to it, there could be parameters where unless you breach the surface of an object, it's hollow. It's not, all the atomic activity of that table, of your coffee cup, in no way, shape, or form, because I'm at a distance, is it realistic until a certain parameter is measured. So there's all these shortcuts, like we're in this room, what's on the other side of this wall? If I hear some noises, that could just be the simulation making sure it appears as though there's something going on in there. Those people that I know as my neighbors, but they don't actually, unless they're in my field of view or the computer has decided to schedule or allow me to interact with them, they're not being computed. Nothing outside of my field of perception is actually being computed. I hear a plane, the plane's not there. I see a plane, there's nothing inside it, right? I'm on the plane, looking out the window. That window could just be a screen showing me a really high resolution image of a playback of stuff. So essentially, it's a game of probability that if there are advanced civilizations who are running simulations, then just by the fact that there can be more than one, that means there can be innumerable ones, innumerable simulations. And let's say we ran one. Let's say the Joe Rogan where he couldn't get over the point where we're like, but what if we're the first one? So let's say we're the first one. We run one. Okay, then there's a 1-to-1 ratio between a simulation of the universe and our real universe. But then we copy and paste it onto a different server. Then there's 2-to-1. And then someone else in a different country decides to run it from a different perspective with different parameters. And the next thing you know, there's 10,000. So immediately just in our own little tiny corner of the universe, there's a 10,000-to-1 ratio of simulations to our real universe. So that's essentially, and someone could probably explain the mathematical probability of it, but it's a simple example of saying, so that's why he says there's I think a 3 in 5 chance, like a 60% chance, or it might even be 20% that we're in a simulation. Then the philosophers kick in, right? So what does it mean? If we don't know, then it doesn't mean anything. We can think about it and it's fun, or the Matrix. But what does it mean for our existence if we were to discover it? Right? So that's interesting as well. If we're in a simulation, and some people have speculated that if we find something that suggests an incredibly regular, pixelated, or some sort of evidence at maybe the most granular level of space-time, that might suggest, it's too whatever, right? I think there's one guy I can't remember if he's an astrophysicist, but he found very regular, almost, I don't know if it's well regarded, but what he felt was a patterning in the amino acids in genetic codes, where he felt that it was just too non-random. So he felt that essentially he was looking at code written.
That's a good point to ask. What is the proof so far that people have found or touch on that we actually are in a simulation? Aside from it's just a fun idea.
I would have to say, that right now, something that could be constituted as proof, I'd have, some people make jokes about it humorously that there's no way that this could happen. Donald Trump was proof that being the president of the U.S. was proof we're in a simulation. Those things, as much as they're fun to entertain, I don't think constitute proof. If you wanted, it would depend.
What about the whole glitch theory?
Like the things that, I've seen. And once again, is that humorous or is that just interesting? Because there's however many, almost 10 billion people or 8 billion people on the planet. You see those photos on Reddit where someone's on the train and there's 6 people in a row that are basically dressed the same, very closely. And you start looking, in a video game, there'll be a mistake where there's an accumulation of the same kind of car, the same kind of whatever. Those are interesting. I think what would probably constitute proof, and some people, there would have to be some physical evidence, short of someone writing in the sky, like, how's the simulation today, you know? and unless there's an outside intervention where someone literally like poked through the sky and was like, hey, mofos, I'm about to delete your simulation, so I just want to say goodbye. I think it would have to be probably something in physics or something in biology that found fairly indisputable proof of some level of engineering. So I'd say at this point, no. There's an interesting, because again, you know, I like reading about this. So the guy David Chalmers, who came up with the hard problem of consciousness kind of phrase, he just came out with a book that is essentially saying that even if it were, he's actually asserting that virtual reality is no less real than reality. So there's that. But one physicist, and I believe he's looking, he theorizes that there could be evidence that information is the fifth state, is one of the states of matter. So it's a new state of matter. So I don't know what that implies for the whole simulation theory, because if for some reason he finds scientific evidence that information is a form of matter, then that skews the conversation interestingly. What if the universe is expanding because of this information that's contained in dark, that we used to think was dark matter, is actually information? What do we call that? Like, so yeah, it's always fun. It's fun to think about, but
put it in there with the flat Earth theory.
No, I actually, because again, this person, and there are people who poo-poo it, but probability is really important in thinking about it. You know, one of my books on the shelf, Ian Banks, he's passed away, but he's a sci-fi writer. He talked a lot about a civilization that's basically human, but it's like a socialist civilization called a culture, and it's largely run by these super intelligent AIs that don't even exist entirely in reality. They're in like hyperspace. They're so gigantic. And he brings up the simulation problem with one of their AIs because they decide to run simulations, but because of their immense computing power, they can run them to the point like this, where there are, so say they're simulating a possible war on a planet. They can simulate everything so that these simulated entities have a rich internal experience, memories, you know, thoughts about the future. And so there's actually an ethical argument in this book, and in, you know, an ongoing thread through the series, is can you delete them? What do you do once you create the simulation? Like, ethically speaking, you've created entities that, as far as they're concerned, are alive and have rich internal landscapes and lives and offspring and social relationships. So once again, if you just look at it, I see, because right now that's what we do constantly, is try to, even in lab experiments where they try to look at the basic constituents of matter, but where they look at the basic constituents of matter and try to make simple life come about, they're trying to simulate the beginning of life on Earth, or the beginning of life in the universe. So we're already doing it in a chemical sense, and I'm quite sure, we simulate the weather, we simulate a whole populations, traffic. There's no reason, especially say quantum computing comes along and allows us to run these massively differentiated scenarios. Why wouldn't we do it? And we're already doing it in very small ways, in very compartmentalized ways. So I don't see it as being, it's not a woo-woo thing. I think it's something that it's something that you should look at, and I think it's fascinating. I think it's fascinating that there are people who have the scientific tools to possibly look into, again, whether it's biology or physics, and find out if we are. The question then is, if we answer it and it's a yes with certainty, what happens? People wig out about what would happen if we knew for sure. If the government said for sure, here's an alien, they'd just like you to meet someone from another planet. Think about what if we found out that all of this is running on a computer in a different universe. But then the question is, what about them? And then we just keep going. So I don't know. It's a neat one. Yeah. Then philosophically speaking, because people, this is probably, and I don't know if you'd ask about this, but like I think I was telling you, I was reading a book on panpsychism. So they're trying to assert that consciousness is replete, like it's throughout all matter. So when you look at like an electron, for instance, we can describe what it does, how it behaves, but not why. So this one guy I was reading, Philip Goff, says that consciousness is in all matter, and very simple behaviors like the spin of an electron or the mass or whatever it might be instantiations of their behaviors and their properties as conscious things. So if you look on the simulation thing, then it's interesting to think about like spirituality or people who do deep levels of meditation and then come back with a claim that the universe is rife with consciousness, and we're like, if you think of it like consciousness, the universe and consciousness is one big ocean, and we're just like these wave fronts. We're just like these peaks that poke up and consider themselves like, look at me, I'm this awesome wave. But really, you're just like something coming out of this greater field. So when you look at the simulation, what if there are characteristics of consciousness that can't help but be put into a system when you create it? So is that why spirituality, is it some underlying thing that we're keying into? Or is it part of the program? Or is the simulation generated, what if there's a whole bunch, what if the simulation is generated by a whole bunch of super brains linked together, and that's why there's this feeling of consciousness? What if it's just like, and then, again, the thing that's interesting about it is that there's no reason as to why it can't be true, aside from computing power. But I don't know. I'm always a person who, I laugh at people who are naysayers, because you look in the history books and over and over people said about things are not possible, right? Even one of the Wright brothers, I can't remember if it was Orville or the other one, I think it was weeks before they achieved flight, said it's going to take, it's never going to happen. I forget who it was, but again, it was a week before someone showed that basically the nuclear chain reaction was possible, was saying it was totally impossible. It never happened. Radio's never going to catch on. Over and over and over. Even, Bill Gates will never need more than 128 kilobytes of RAM in a computer, right? All of these ridiculous assertions. And I was just reading a quote, and I can't recall who it's ascribed to, but essentially everything is theoretically impossible until it happens. And to think about the simulation thing, there's no possible way, especially just even before, if we hit artificial general intelligence and had an entity that was super brilliant, and we just had to dump a whole bunch of computers at it and give it time and space to answer questions like some kind of fucking oracle or genie, that one of the questions would be like, look at the underlying mechanisms of reality, and is this real? What the hell's going on? So there's no reason that people wouldn't ask those questions. So I think again, part of it just allows it to be like this, stoner conversation. But part of it is it's important because of the fact that what if we do get to the point where we can create virtual realities that, whether it's through, I think it'll probably be some sort of actual physical brain interface. If we get to the point where we can exist in a total virtuality, these questions about what life in a simulation actually means are transposed directly onto that. Is it real life? And again, I forget what it's called. But David Chalmers' new book addresses this, where he asserts that, you think the virtual world is no different than the real world. And yeah, it starts to be that weird thing where you hold two mirrors up together and it's just infinite. There's and then there's the nested thing. Is it like those what do they call Matryoshka dolls, or is it like those Russian nesting dolls where it's just we're the latest ones who ask the question, and as soon as the question's asked, I find it fascinating. As soon as someone comes up with a concept, and someone's going to look into it as a possibility. And yeah, so again, it's an interesting thing. I don't know, because I don't think anyone does. Aside from, let's say it's a 20% chance, it's a 1 in 5 chance that we're living in a simulation is pretty high. But what the hell are we going to do about it? And even if we did find out, let's say we found, like you would on a product, they turn on that James Webb telescope and they look so far, and they find out like a trademark on the edge of the universe. Trademark Quetzalcoatl Industries, and dated 3.8 billion years ago. What do we do? Start yelling? Like, what if we're running on a computer? What if we're running a computer in like a multi-dimensional, super evolved version of Future Shop just to show how good the computer is? And it's been running for 10 seconds. This is the thing. Well, who's to say? What if it's running at 1,000 times speed? What if we're just like a weird podcast? What if we're a game? And then what do? You go, I don't know. I don't know what would happen. It's an interesting question. And I'm just...
It could be, Grand Theft Auto 101.
Oh, fuck, man. Well, because there's a lot of nihilistic people out there. If you want to say that nothing matters, what's your better justification for any kind of insane behavior, finding out that you're not real? But then, it's a philosophical question. What would be reality then? What would you consider it? I feel subjectively that I'm real. I know that you most likely do. So what would it change about our existence? I think it would fuck us up pretty good, though. Forgive my language, but I think it would definitely be... There would definitely be, in certain cultures and places, there would definitely be some probably negative repercussions. I don't know. What does it mean to go to work for 40 hours a week when you know that you're a simulation? I'll leave it at that.